Good morning, everyone. Can we make a test for the interpreters?
No.
So it's an honor and a pleasure to be gathered today with you to discuss the sensitive topic of enforced disappearance in the context of migration. So I was asked to moderate this panel on behalf of CCFD Terre Solidaire, which is a French-based NGO supporting local associations around the world working on enforced disappearance. And what struck us, me and my colleagues a few months ago, is that more and more NGOs are taking up the topic of enforced disappearance in the context of migration. Sometimes NGOs that were working on other topics related to human rights and said that they had to do so. They had to take up this topic because of the rising numbers of enforced disappearance on the migration routes, especially towards the north, and because of the indifference that this human drama is meeting currently. So the panel will be divided in two sessions. The first one will be focused on the causes of enforced disappearance in the context of migration and the needs. And the second panel will be more focusing on the answers that are brought or that could be brought to answer these needs. So with us today, to enlighten us on this topic, we have ENAMORADO. She's the coordinator of ReReFaMi, which is a network of women from Central America who are looking for their children who disappeared on the migration route towards Mexico. Anna is looking for her son, Oscar, since 2010. And she has been attacked in her efforts to find truth and justice. So she will share with us. Thank you very much for being here to share with us your experience. Then we have Helena MALENO GARZÓN. Helena is a human rights defender, journalist, and researcher. She's also a doctor at university, and she is the founder and CEO of Caminando Fronteras, Walking Borders, which is it's an NGO defending human rights in bordering areas. Thank you very much for being here. And at my right is Mrs. Barbara LOCHBIHLER. Barbara is serving her second term as an elected member of the CED, the UN Committee on Enforced Disappearance. And she has been initiating the comment number 1 of the Convention on enforced disappearance in the context of migration. So she will be telling us about this today to better understand what we mean when we talk about enforced disappearance in the context of migration. Thank you very much for being here. So without further ado, let's start. And Mrs. LOCHBIHLER, the enforced disappearance in the context of migration is not as obvious as the disappearance in the context of political repression, for instance. In this context, could you tell us how you initiated this general comment number 1 to the CED and help us understand better this phenomenon?
Okay, thank you. So in the Committee on Enforced Disappearance, we basically assist state parties to fulfill their obligations under the convention. And the other chunk of work is to kind of clarify the scope of the treaty. And this we do together with all actors and stakeholders. And as you also said, there is around in the world a lot of migrants who go missing. This figure is increasing, but missing is much broader than enforced disappearance. So there is and was a need actually to look particularly on the connection of migrants working on suffering and preventing them from enforced disappearance. And when we had dialogues with the state parties, some state parties, we as experts put questions. How is the situation for migrants in your country? And here we clearly saw that there is not much, how can I say, policy to it or thoughts being given on the situation of migrants. We use the term migrants in an inclusive way, so that we also think about the situation of refugees and, let's say, in looser terms, on all people on the move. Then when discussing this in the committee with state parties and amongst us as experts, we also realized the particular situation of vulnerability of migrants and of the relevance of migrants. Because frequently they are also migrants, and very often they explained that they are afraid, for example, to go through the authorities to report if a relative is missing or disappeared. And they have a lot of obstacles and face discriminations when they report a disappearance to the authorities. In the dialogue with state parties, we also realized, and also from following the media outside, that a lot of states increased militarization of their borders. So by doing this, forcing people on the move to look for all kinds of ways to save their lives or to migrate. So I think there is clearly, we see a big lack of a human rights-based border management in, I would say, all regions of the country, but I'm a European. I see it here a lot. And then, let's say, when we discussed it in the committee, we also saw that we have to have a focus not only to confront state parties with failures of or with enforced disappearances of migrants on their territory or their borders. We also discussed that we have to see what states can do to prevent that migrants become victims of enforced disappearance. So I would say that was actually the rationale of explaining why we adopt the general comment.
Thank you very much, Barbara. So now let's ask Ana ENAMORADO about her experience from the other point of view, the point of view of a person who has a lived experience of enforced disappearance. Ana ENAMORADO, could you tell us in which circumstances occurred the enforced disappearance of your son?
Sí. Claro que sí.
Right, of course. Well,
días
good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to all of the people who are listening to us, to all of the people who are here with us. And I'd like to thank especially the organizers for having invited me. The organizers of this event, especially Terre Solidaire, for having invited me. And as has just been mentioned, I am the mother of Oscar Antonio López Enamorado, who is here on screen. Oscar is my only son. He is from Honduras, and he disappeared on the 19th of January 2010 in the state of Jalisco in Mexico. And in the context of migration, Oscar, like thousands of people from Central America, of young Central American people who leave their country and try to reach the United States. And on the road, going through Mexico, they disappear. 15 years have elapsed since I've started fighting to find out what happened to my son, where he is, what happened to him. So far, I have not been successful. I do not know anything about him. And for more than 12 years, I've been living in Mexico to find out where my son is. But although I have struggled so hard, so far Oscar is not with me, he's not with his family, he's not in society. And he also needs that.
el contexto de la
The context
violencia e
of
impunidad
violence
en
and
que
impunity
afecta de
that
manera muy
affects,
general a toda la
in
población
general
mexicana,
terms, to the whole Mexican population.
también afecta a las personas
It also
migrantes,
affects
porque
migrant
muchas
people on the move, because
de las
a lot
personas
of these people
cruzan el país en
cross the
condiciones
whole country
muy vulnerables.
under
La gran
highly
mayoría de
vulnerable
ellos han
conditions.
sido
Most of them
desplazados de su
have
país de
been
origen por esta misma situación,
displaced
por
from their
la
original countries because of this situation,
violencia,
because of the
por todas las
violence,
precariedades
because of
que
the
ellos viven
precariousness
en sus países de
that they
origen, sobre
experience
todo
in their own
Centroamérica,
country throughout Central
y
America.
cuando pasan por México,
And
pues se
when they
enfrentan
go
a
through
esta
Mexico, they
situación
face this situation,
tan compleja, ¿no? Lo
such a
que es
complex
pasar
situation.
por México
I mean,
en un país
crossing
donde hay más
Mexico,
de
a country
110,000
in which there are
personas
more than
desaparecidas
110,000
y
people who have
pues
disappeared,
obviamente de las personas
110,000
migrantes
missing people. And clearly,
se sabe muy
migrant
poco
people,
o
well,
no
we know
mucho
very little about them,
de
very
cuántas
little
personas hay
about
desaparecidas en
how
territorio
many people
mexicano,
have
personas
disappeared in
migrantes.
Mexican territory,
Entonces,
how many missing people,
las personas pues se
how many
enfrentan
missing
a
migrants there
una
are in
situación muy
Mexico.
fuerte
So people
porque
face a very difficult
debido a
situation
estas políticas
because
migratorias que
due
cada
to
vez son
these
más duras,
migration
pues ellos
policies,
son
which are becoming
obligados a
harder and
contratar
harder, they are forced
a
to hiring
personas,
people,
a los
the
coyotes
so-called
para que les
coyotes,
crucen pagándoles
to
unas
help them
cantidades
cross
muy
the
altas
border,
de
paying them a
dinero
high amount of money.
y estos coyotes pues
And
obviamente les
these
pagan a la
guides,
policía, al
called
Instituto Nacional de
coyotes, they
Migración,
bribe
entre
police
otros,
people
para
in the
que
National
ellos
Institute of
puedan
Migration, amongst
avanzar.
others, for
Algunos
them
de
to
ellos que
make
no
headway.
tienen las
Some of
condiciones,
them
no
who
tienen
do
los
not
recursos
meet the
y
conditions or who do not have the
pues
resources,
ante la negativa de las
given
autoridades que
the
no les
denial of the
atienden cuando
authorities,
llegan a
the authorities
solicitar
do not
un documento migratorio para poder
accept
cruzar por
them
México
when they
o no
ask
les
for a
atienden
migration document to be able
para
to cross
protegerlas
Mexico,
porque
or they
vienen
do not protect
huyendo
them
de esta
because they
situación, pues los pone
fleeing
aún
from the situation in their own
en un
country.
estado de
Well,
vulnerabilidad más
that
fuerte
places them
y
in
son
a
obligados
very,
a
very
avanzar
deep
por territorio
vulnerability situation, and
mexicano
they are forced
y es
to
cuando llegan a
carry
caer en
on
las manos de
in
grupos
Mexican territory.
criminales.
And that's when
Y
they
así
fall
es como
in
ocurre la
the
desaparición. Se
hands
pierde
of
el
criminal
contacto
organizations, and
con los
that's when
familiares y
we
nunca
lose
más
them.
volvemos a saber de ellos.
We lose contact. They lose contact with their family members, and we never know anything about them ever again.
Merci beaucoup, Madame ENAMORADO. Thank you very much. We understand the complexity of the situation of a family member looking for a disappeared one who disappeared, who know who, where on the road, and who also face the indifference of the authorities and the lack of mechanism to help search for them. At Caminando Fronteras, which type of work did you develop in addressing this complex issue?
Bueno, muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning, everybody.
Nuestra labor se desarrolla
Our
en
work
procesos
is
de
developed
movilidad humana
in human mobility processes.
Voilà. En procesos de movilidad humana en la
In
frontera
human mobility
occidental
processes in the
euroafricana, que son
Western
todas estas rutas
Euro-African
migratorias.
border. All of
Por
this
una parte
migration
tenemos las
route.
rutas
On the one hand, we
mediterráneas y
have
por
the
otra parte las
Mediterranean route,
rutas
and on the other
atlánticas.
hand, the Atlantic
En
route.
estas rutas migratorias han aumentado
In
las
these
desapariciones en los
migration
últimos
routes,
años, pero no solo por la
disappearances have
peligrosidad de
increased
las
in the last
rutas
few
en
years,
sí
not only
mismas,
because of the
sino porque la
routes
militarización que
being
ha
very
señalado la
dangerous in that
compañera
subject,
del
but also
del control de
because
fronteras
of the
ha
border
introducido una forma
control
perversa
measures that has introduced
de
a
control
perverse
migratorio,
way
el control
of
del movimiento,
migration
que es la
control,
omisión
of
del deber
control
de
of the
socorro.
migration, which is the mission, which overcomes the mission
Llevamos
of
desde
helping
Caminando
people.
Fronteras más de
At
20 años
Caminando
trabajando en las
Fronteras, we've been
fronteras
working
con
for
una
more than 20 years
metodología de
working on borders
investigación
with a
participativa que se
participative
implementa en el
research
trabajo
and
en red y de
investigation
manera
methodology, which is
horizontal
based on
con las
networking
comunidades
horizontally
migrantes
with the
y
migration
también con
communities,
las familias y con
with the
los
migrant communities, with
supervivientes.
their families and their
Tenemos
survivors.
dos
We
teléfonos
have
de alertas, dos
two
helpline, desde el año
alert
2007,
hotlines
una para
since
alertar sobre
2007,
situaciones
one to
de
alert
riesgo
about risk situations for the lives and human rights in borders. And since 2014, we have another hotline for the families of missing people. Now, these are the terrible data from 2024. 10,457 victims on the routes to access Spain. 30 people die every day in the borders of Spain, in the borders of Europe. 412 of them are women. 1,538 are boys, girls, and teenagers. On the Mediterranean routes, as you can see, 517 come from Algeria, 110 in the Straits, and 73 in the Alboran Sea. But the Atlantic routes are the less visible one, with 9,567 victims, which has turned into the most deadly migration route in the world right now. Out of the Atlantic route, the one in Mauritania is the one you can see has the highest number of victims. But what's most important to point out here is that there are 131 boats that disappeared with all of the people on board. 131 boats, thousands of families that have no response about what happened with their dear ones, with their beloved family members. And that's why we have systemized the information we get on the field. Because this information, these data are a tool to access to the right, the right to the truth of the families. It's a tool to show the liabilities, and it's a way to point out the victimizers, to account the missing people through monitoring, and based on the primary sources, this gives us closer information to reality. We know there are many more, but we're convinced, we're sure that it's not less than these figures. And if 10,547, it's too many.
Thank you very much. We are touching upon the complexity of the search, and I would like to ask you, Mrs. Enamorado, about the difficulties, the extra challenges you're facing when you're looking for your son.
Right. Well, one of the main difficulties and challenges I've had to face is precisely what's involved in looking for somebody from another country, from a country that's not your own. In my case, when I started looking for my son in 2010, I was not heard by my own authorities, by the Honduran authorities, although I went to them and they never did absolutely anything to follow the clues I gave them at the time. And of course, no family is ready to look for a beloved being. No mother, when she decides to have a child, thinks that at some point that child will be missing. So we're not ready. We do not know what to do. We do not know how to go about the search for our children. When I started looking for my son, I didn't know anything about the missing people. I had never heard the term forced disappearance. And then I was forced to leaving my country, Honduras, to go to Mexico and learn to start my life from scratch and to learn from the Mexican families, to continue with my search and to force the authorities to listen to me and to open up a research file and to look for my son in the same way they should look for all of the other missing people. But that has not been easy at all, because I have had to face the institutional violence that all the families of missing people have to face every day, and also the danger that exists in Mexico. We know that in Mexico, they have murdered many mothers who look for their missing children. And I, as a Central American mother who's looking for her missing child in Mexico, I am from Honduras, well, I confront the authorities who do nothing, and I am in a more endangered situation. And mainly, the main difficulty is to cross the borderline to be able to look for our children in a country that's not your own. If you do not have a visa, Central American mothers cannot go to Mexico. They do not have the resources, and they do not have the knowledge to look for their missing children and to force the state to find our disappeared, our missing family members.
Thank you very much. You talked about the difficulty of looking for your child in a context of transnational migration, and you talked about also the institutional violence. So we understand why organizations and NGOs are coming to support families looking for their children, like Caminando Fronteras. They are also facing challenges in their support to the victims of enforced disappearance. Can you tell us more, Mr. MALENO?
Well, the first thing is that we're talking about invisible disappearances, planned disappearances, and disappearances in which oftentimes the global North states are involved. Global North states that look like defenders of democracy and human rights. So it is even more difficult to point out who the victimizers are. And these control systems are a big business for the companies that sell weapons and control and security control organizations. That's why when you denounce them, they actually you're put into danger. And they use the outsourcing of borderlines, Tunisia, Morocco, Libya, etc. They use this as a tool to escape from their own responsibilities, and they outsource and make third countries to be responsible for the borders and for the control of the migration flows. And the duty of rescuing people in the case of our border is a tool to provoke death, to let people die. And this makes the deaths even more invisible, and it does not allow us to point out who the victimizers are. For the past 10 years, the families of young missing people who disappeared because of the intervention of the Spanish armed forces, they are claiming for justice. Spain has not only denied them that justice, but it has not allowed them to identify the corpses that are in Spain, in a Spanish city. Now, this video that I shall show you next will show us an extract of that family, of that work with the families.
Voilà, nous sommes une association qui s'appelle Collectif Caminando Fronteras. Nous sommes spécialisés dans la migration, d'accord?
There must be some sort of technical problem.
Notre travail est, on est beaucoup puissant.
We are powerful in research. We do research work to give support to the rights of migrant people. That always happened in Spanish waters, very far from where the migrants had. Unfortunately, nobody had floaters, or the tools that they used as floaters left their bodies. We lost contact with the migrants. We have not been able to see or do anything about what happened.
Aquí, este es el momento en el que las
this is
madres
the moment
saben
in
la
which
verdad
the mothers
y ven cómo la
find
Guardia
out
Civil
the truth, and
Española
they see how the
dispara
Spanish
contra las personas
civil
migrantes.
guard
A
shoots
partir de ahí
against
inician un
migrants.
proceso
After
de
that,
búsqueda
they
de
started a
justicia que
process
10
to
años
look
después
for
aún
justice,
no han
which 10 years
conseguido.
later they have not been able to get. That's why one of the main problems is the criminalization and stigmatization of missing people in migration context, in context of human mobility and their family members, as my colleague here has said. This creates an enormous impunity and a lack of access with guarantees to processes of truth, repair, and justice. Disappearances, especially on the sea, which leave no traces, are very difficult to reconstruct for the families. The families, in addition, they have no access to denunciation instruments. They cannot report things. As my colleague said, the visa problem is applicable to all countries in the world. But in addition, they do not allow for DNA samples to be taken in embassies and consulates in the original countries. And what's more painful is that given the lack of real information, the extortion and coercion laws, they sell to the family members false information. In spite of it all, families are struggling to dismantle these policies of death at the border, to know the truth and to be able to find the missing people, and in the case of finding them once they have died, to be able to bury them in a dignified way.
So we understand that the development of migration policies that are violating human rights are implied within the enforced disappearance in the context of migration. Mrs. LOCHBIHLER, how the general comment number 1 could be mobilized by several or various stakeholders in order to better enter the needs of persons victims of enforced disappearance in this context?
Well, when we established this general comment or worked on it, it is a huge process within the committee. So actually, it was very useful that we had the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and all their regional offices to broadly consult and to consult the human rights NGOs and experts, but also those who are working on migration. So they may not have a very strong human rights-based focus. And that was really very helpful because also what 2 of you now said, we established this concept, global compact, general comment in a time when actually at the US-Mexican border, but also the land and the Mediterranean border in the European Union became more and more militarized, and the governments at the same time involved in increasing the militarization and covering up pushbacks and so on, at the same time saying, we, like in Europe, we protect the human rights of migrants. That's very difficult. So we had broad consultations with state parties, asking what do you do if you fight illegal migration? What do you do to allow legal migration? And so I think we used these 2 rounds of public consultations with state parties, with institutions, with experts in Latin America and the Caribbean, in the MENA rights, which includes also Morocco, Tunisia, with Asia and the Pacific. And so I think we brought a lot of information together and networked. And what we do now is we follow up those networks to learn from each other. Then we clearly also saw from here, from Geneva, that, for example, in the Asia Pacific, there is not so much experience like in the Americas and how they can learn from each other. And we also now inside our committee, we ask regularly and frequently in the dialogue with state parties, how is the situation in their country working on migrants? And actually, to my surprise, I have to say, we also have been thanked by governments that we came up with this precise general comment and the recommendations which helped them actually to improve their work. Preventing enforced disappearance. And I think what we, in summing up this, there is a clear need. If we look into the cluster of those who are working on migration, let's say also the International Red Cross and these institutions working on huge projects globally on missing migrants, to have a very specific focus on a human rights-based discussion to look into disappearances and also into enforced disappearance, and encourage their staff and their teams to be trained to do this.
Thank you very much. So we understand that states were even sometimes thankful to be assisted in mainstreaming human rights in this context, and you formulated recommendations. Could you tell us a bit more about maybe specific recommendations you will give to states and other stakeholders?
So, you know, the underlying issue, and I think also Ana ENAMORADO, you said this clearly, the migrations politics get harder and harder, you say. Now, you see, we have to have an evidence-based migration policies in the countries, which includes to also fight illegal migration. But what we see is that there is a shrinking view only on fighting illegal migration, which criminalizes each person who is on the move. So it goes completely in the wrong direction. So the strong recommendation from the general comment is to adopt evidence-based migrations policies and foster access to legal and regular migration. Then, very precisely, we recommend to avoid and prohibit secret and incommunicado detention of migrants. And there should be no such incommunicado detention for migrants. And they should also not say if it is only for a short term, it's okay. There should no be, how can I say, the deprivation of liberty should not take place of migrants. Then you have to establish registers in the camps which you have at your borders or within the country. And we need to improve the search for migrants, and therefore we have to know where they are. And this is crucial. We explicitly looked in the tactic or in the method of pushbacks. When we started some years ago on this general comment, it was not clear that pushbacks is a kind of a method which facilitates actually also that migrants become victims of enforced disappearance. So we clearly say that pushbacks are incompatible with state obligations under the convention and can amount to enforced disappearance if they involve the deprivation of liberty of persons and the concealment of their fate or whereabouts. We also recommend that mechanisms must be put in place to support relatives and witnesses. And now, very often they face language barriers and they are being afraid of being detained or deported. But you know, we have a lot of very detailed recommendations. We also ask states to give a visa to relatives to come, for example, to Europe and to look and to try to help in the search and to identify. And then we need to foster international cooperation between the states, regional and also international cooperation, and that states have good communications between the country of origin, the transit, and the country of destination. And this opens a lot of questions who are not answered completely on data protection also, because some people are on the move because they are feeling they are threatened in their home country. So it's very difficult to exchange and to develop a good data policy. Yeah, I think these are the big clusters of our recommendations.
Thank you very much. Those are very precious recommendations. We understand that mainly safe routes for migration and the absence of criminalization of migrants is key. I will ask you the same question, Mrs. MALENO GARZÓN. What are the recommendations you will make?
Quería primero First of all, concerning pushback, I would like to remind you that in 2022, we saw this terrible situation on the Melilla fence, and starting in 2022, more than 100 people, most of them coming from Sudan, are disappeared. And last time they were seen, they were under custody from the national security forces in Spain and Morocco. Therefore, for us, these are one of the most recent forced disappearances. Concerning the recommendations, acknowledging the disappearances in context of mobility and award them the same rights as any other disappeared, and therefore recognizing as well the rights of their families, fostering the access to reporting, to taking DNA samples, to the creation of ante-mortem databases that can be cross-checked with post-mortem data from the bodies that keep appearing. When disappearances are transnational, we must develop necessary tools to carry out queries through consulates, embassies, the so-called visas that have already been named, but we must also arm civil servants with anti-racist proposals, because racism is one of the most terrible blights that families searching for their disappeared loved ones in context of human mobilities are faced with. We must work in collective reparations, understanding that the impact of these macro disappearances, as we saw with the 10,000 victims, also cause mass victimization in the towns and communities of origin. We must favor spaces for listening, encounter, and reparations for these families within public administration and international entities. A wider presence for families, have them be received by the government from global North states, who are also responsible and complicit, and above all, to end the impunity of the killers, because we have shown you thousands of victims on European borders today, but we have not had any condemnation that secures justice, maybe because the perpetrators are unfortunately too powerful. Today, victims of forced disappearances in the process of human mobility are also present. Oh, it's not working. Oh, sorry, we were hoping to show a video from our website where you will find pictures, photographs and names of so many disappeared people. You can access it directly, because as I just said, we want these victims to be present here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe at the end, during the coffee break, we can project it. You shared with us very important recommendations also to ease the work of the families. I would also like to hear from ENAMORADO, what recommendation would you make to the different actors so that your search is finally successful?
Well, same as my colleagues, I believe all families have the same needs, and the demands on states and the authorities are the same. We want missing people to be searched. We want punishment for the perpetrators of these disappearances. We want to stop impunity. Yesterday, we talked at length about impunity, about empowering families. I believe that the families who started the fight to know the truth, to understand what happened to our loved ones and our family members, their struggle was born out of pain and out of love for family members. And I believe that more than anything, we must enable public servants who are part of the institutions, who must face these families in the origin country when a family member approaches an official office, let's say a consulate. Action must be taken immediately, immediate coordination with the country where the disappearance took place, and have a follow-up for the location of the disappeared person and avoid this toll, the toll it takes on the families. And we need for that either humanitarian international organisms. They must be able to take action with the necessary resources so that this training in Mexico, as well as the origin countries, we must ensure that the people and the mechanisms that are involved are trained. The National Network of Migrant Families, we have tried to push this training on officials in our home countries, but we received no response when back in the day they sought me out and said that the president of Honduras was interested, but it turned out to be false. We require support from the UN committee to ensure that the work from the authorities is effective, as well as the fact that families get all the resources that they need so they may reach the country where their family member disappeared, that they may access their right to search for them, to be given all the tools, all the resources and security for them to reach a Mexican land and continue the search. Here in Europe, many people disappeared crossing the Mediterranean. I know Tunisian and Algerian mothers searching for their family members. And they too need to reach Europe to look for their family members. And they must be given the tools to do so. So we need some policing in institutions so that the work that they do is effective, as well as for public servants who are not doing the work that they should be doing. Well, they must be sacked. We must employ people who do have the will and the desire to solve this problem.
Thank you very much. So you said it's the person who are victims of disappearance on the road should be treated as any person who has disappeared. They should be searched and looked for, and their family should have the same rights as the other. Thank you very much for your testimony. We will welcome now the second panel, but stay next to us because we will need you to answer the questions at the end. Thank you. So now we touched upon the needs and already solutions. We will build up on this first session with our new panelists. And I welcome His Excellency, Mr. Gustavo GALLÓN, who is the ambassador of Colombia in Geneva, chairman of the UN Group on Migration and Development, and permanent representative of Colombia to the United Nations in Geneva. Welcome. We have with us today also Eulàlia Figueras CIVIT, currently serving as an international migration law specialist for the International Organization for Migration, the IOM, and she worked in the past notably for IOM in Morocco and Colombia. Thank you for being with us today. Next to you is Mrs. Gordana Vukasin. She's the project manager for Click Active, an NGO based in Serbia that provides legal aid and psychological support to people on the move, migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, and they are focusing on vulnerable groups. They are working on addressing risks faced by people in the context of migration, and they are one of the NGOs that had to work on enforced disappearance because of the facts, the context. And with us, we also have Milica KOLAKOVIC-BOJOVIC, who is the Vice President of the UN Committee on Enforced Disappearances and rapporteur also on the General Comment #1, who will help us sum up this session and take away with us some key points. Thank you all. So, Your Excellency, Colombia is one of the champion country of the Global Compact on Migration. Can you share your experience as a country of origin, transit, and destination regarding the thematic of enforced disappearance in the context of migration?
Concerning, this is a very important organization concerning the human rights, as well as the civil and political rights. I would like to also give a very special greeting to the members of the panels, and I sincerely thank them for inviting Colombia to share our experience. I would like to start by giving some context about the phenomenon that we mean by our experience as an origin, transit, and destination country. The first thing I would like to say is that, traditionally speaking, Colombia has been a country of origin for migrants, a country of expulsion. For decades, Colombians have borne witness to a long internal armed conflict, which has made 1 million Colombians, 1 million, have been forced to leave the country, according to a report for the Committee for Truth in 2022. This is the second group with the largest amount of victims for that reason. The Colombian armed conflict after the internal displaced, which are more than 8 million. The third group of victims of the armed conflict are those who lost their lives for that reason, which amount to 500,000 people. We have at least another 1 million Colombians who look for a better future outside of our borders for reasons other than the armed conflict, totaling or exceeding 2 million Colombian migrants or more. 1 million of people in exile because of the armed conflict and others for economic, financial, and social reasons. However, and this is the second aspect of the phenomenon, over the past few years, let's say 7 or 8 years ago, Colombia became also one of the main countries for receiving migrants. Today, our country has over 3 million of our Venezuelan brothers and sisters, 2,800,000 to be more precise. Even though we were not a receiving country, the Colombian government advocated the reception and welcoming of our Venezuelan siblings through a temporal statute of protection. And I think it's important to keep in mind that for many years, decades even, our twin country, Venezuela, was one of the main countries of destination for our Colombian migrants, especially those who migrated for financial reasons. Many Colombians have been living in Venezuela for many years. They have set roots in the country. To this scenario, we add an additional factor, third element, which is that over the past few years, the past 2 years actually, we became a transit country. Since northern Colombia shares a very important forest with Panama called the Darien Stopper, which is the only land pass between South and Central America. And truly, we couldn't even say that it's a land pass because it's a truly inhospitable forest, beautiful but inhospitable, containing a huge amount of risk, which unfortunately has become, over the past few years, in an irregular path that thousands of migrants choose to reach the north. Just to give you an idea, we have had over 1,000 people crossing this pass daily. Moreover, the lack of knowledge on the path that this pass really takes increases the risk for disappearance and other crimes such as rape, which increases the amount of people disappearing in transit and the appearance of dead bodies on road. In other parts of the territory, our ombudsman highlights that in this irregular migratory route between the island of San Andrés and Nicaragua, we also find traffic of people, of migrants, shipwrecks, abandoning of the ships in the middle of the sea, and disappearances of many migrants. Obviously, Colombia has a vast experience with the search of people disappeared, thanks unfortunately to the people disappeared during the armed conflict, even though results are still very scant. However, in the migration context, the forced disappearance of migrants is less than 0.5% of statistics. Apparently, a reduced, seemingly small amount of people amounting to 5,000 people, which is a dramatically serious situation. It is important to highlight that regardless of the status of the missing people, Colombia seeks to combine efforts between different general institutions such as the State General Attorney, the General Forensic Agent, the Direction of the National Police, Interpol, to offer a concerted and holistic effort to whatever is done for the disappearances. We have the tools to seek out, track, and look at each case individually, supporting both the victims and their families. Migración Colombia, which is the entity which is in charge of migrations, developed a mobile app, Libertad, so that possible victims of human trafficking can report these crimes during displacement. This is what's going on in our country in this context. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. We understand that Colombia is really taking seriously this phenomenon of enforced disappearance, and you gave us very concrete tools that you developed for the search. Other countries are less advanced, and I would say, how IOM can help in addressing this issue of enforced disappearances in the context of migration. Thank you.
Merci, Charlotte. Thank you so much to all the organizers and the sponsors and my co-panelists. It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. IOM has a strong commitment to protecting, promoting, respecting, and fulfilling migrant rights in line with our constitution, the agreement with the UN, but also our new strategic plan. IOM places the well-being of migrants at the center of its operations. Now, we also encourage a comprehensive approach to the rights of migrants and the duties of states under international law. States do have a prerogative and a sovereign duty and right to manage migration and their borders, but they must do so in line with international standards. In the context, whilst IOM does not have a specific mandate to monitor and investigate enforced disappearances, IOM's policies and programming strive to follow a rights-based approach and to address human rights violations, which include enforced disappearances. Allow me to share some of the avenues in which IOM tries to tackle directly or indirectly this issue. First, supporting states and key actors in search and rescue operations that are at sea, land, and desert, and enhancing humanitarian border management, aiming to guide stakeholders and prevent practices that contravene international law, such as refoulement and pushbacks, and collective expulsions as well. Providing assistance, screening, and referral to migrants that are in vulnerable situations throughout their journeys. That can go from protection services, urgent shelter, legal assistance and aid, family reunification, psychological support, etc. Organizing capacity building activities on issues that are linked to enforced disappearances, training border and law enforcement officials on the rights of migrants at borders, alternatives to detention, training forensic and medical personnel as well on data management, and training judicial actors on counter-trafficking, just to name a few. But also expanding and fostering regular pathways to support migrants moving safely and regularly, thereby reducing the risks of disappearances, including enforced disappearances, along routes that are irregular and that are highly dangerous, while working to address discrimination and human rights violations in countries of origin, transit, and destination. Data remains a challenging but a central issue for IOM, and it is a crucial issue as well for the enforced disappearance discussion. Considering the differences, as has been shared by my colleague from the committee, Barbara, the differences between migrants who are victims of a disappearance and those that are missing, let me mention one of IOM's flagship initiatives, the Missing Migrants Project, which records people who have lost their lives in the process of migrating towards an international border, an international destination, regardless of their migratory status. Since 2014, the project has recorded 70,725 missing migrants, 70,725 victims, persons who have lost their lives, as well as the families and communities that they have left behind. This project aims to improve data and documentation of migrant deaths, also in the context of enforced disappearances, helps identify patterns for these disappearances, and hopes to inform prevention and response strategies. For IOM, we encourage the use of this data, which is public, and hope to continue supporting the committee and all stakeholders in their tremendous and long-standing efforts. In short, IOM's approach to addressing enforced disappearances stems from the organization's commitment to upholding human rights, and focuses on prevention, advocacy, and supporting the main actors, with the objective to increase enforced disappearances prevention and hopefully strengthen accountability for those who are affected. Thank you.
Thank you. So it seems that in some contexts, like the context of Serbia, many times families of migrants are left alone. And that's why Click Active took on the topic. How did you develop your work related to enforced disappearances in the context of migration?
Hello. First of all, hello to everyone, and thank you for the invitation to participate here today. So, yeah, that is the question that raised, especially during the last year, and we are strongly, through our work, trying to address this question of enforced disappearances, especially when it comes to the people who are outside of the formal system and who do not have legal residence status in Serbia. In our work, we have developed our internal procedures that facilitate and help us with reporting these cases to relevant institutions or the organizations that are specialized for this issue, such as Red Cross of Republic of Serbia. And beside that, we also developed some of our internal guidelines that help us to have more effective communication with the families of the people who went missing, but also if there is a positive outcome of the search with people who are found, perhaps on the Serbian ground. The other thing that we are trying to emphasize, and which is especially important to us, is identification of the people who are found on our territory, but when the outcome wasn't that positive, because it often happens, especially in the border areas, that people lose their lives, and they are often buried in these places as unidentified persons. We also try to some of the goals of our work are to identify these key points of crossings and these risky places, and also to speak more about the risks that people encounter on their journeys, whether these are pushbacks or the risky routes or all the different things that they encounter, and to try to do something more with connecting the state institutions with the civil society organizations, because we think that the capacities of the civil society organizations are not used in a properly manner within this cooperation. We also do our advocacy in establishing more clear and more standardized procedures within the search and identification, since we value every life, no matter of the nationality of the person.
Yeah, you touched upon the challenges that you are facing as a CSO in Serbia. Can you develop on that? What are the issues you are facing as a CSO, and what are the issues and challenges that are facing your beneficiaries?
Well, the thing is that the Serbia, for most of the people, is just a transit country, which complicates our work, but also affects on the motivation of the institutions to deal with this really specific issue. And families are those who are reporting the case of the missing ones, and it usually happens that families who are reporting the cases are in some other countries. They are not in Serbia, and they really have a lack of information related to the circumstances of the disappearance of their beloved ones. So then there are possible witnesses of these disappearance, but the witnesses also leave the country. It's quite difficult to reach them. The other thing that happens in the practice is that those people who went missing, if they are registered in Serbia, it happens that they give false information about themselves. They give a false name or age or country of origin, which makes it more difficult to trace them if we are looking for them in some institutions such as hospital, detention centers, or something like that. So the only relevant thing that we have is as information, it's photography of them that family sends us. So these are main like obstacles. But again, when it comes to institutions, then the institutions don't see, as I already mentioned, civil society organizations as partners within this. They see us more as intruders or someone who will criticize them or something like that. So that is the other problem that we are facing in this type of work. And if you are looking at the wider picture, there is no political will for dealing with this issue, which again is pushing people who are in this migratory process towards the smugglers and the smuggling networks, and exposing them to greater risks, such as being kidnapped by smugglers or to go through some risky routes where they are losing their lives. And what we are again hearing from the field, for example, is that smugglers are now offering some premium packages where people need to pay more if they want their body to be identified, if they drown or something like that. In that case, a person who is sent by the smugglers will come and identify the body, so they will be buried with the name, and video materials will be sent to the families as a confirmation. So that is really a bad practice and doesn't guarantee anything. And additionally, there is no unified database of the missing persons. So people often lose their traces when they disappear in this context of migration. And if the outcome is negative and if a body is found, it often happens that these people weren't even reported that they were missing. And since there is no mandatory autopsy and the samples of the tissue are not being taken, in these cases, these people are just buried without any trace, without name, without anything. So families who are looking for them cannot find them. It's quite difficult. And just to add one more good example of that practice is in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where there is one of the pathologists who is voluntarily keeping the tissue samples of the refugees who unfortunately drowned in Drina River, most of them, and keeping them for more than 6 months in order that if a family is looking for some relative family member can identify them. So that's it.
Thank you. This premium package from the smugglers that you mentioned gives me chills. It seems that smugglers are going straight into the breach that is left by institutions. And this echoed what I experienced when visiting Serbia, Bosnia, and Greece last summer. It seems that CSOs are quite isolated in their struggle and facing their state institutions in Europe, and could maybe get more support from the international organizations. Mrs. CIVIT, from the IOM perspective, is there a need to better articulate the activities of the IOM and the institutions and CSOs?
IOM definitely continues to work with the support of member states, donors, civil society actors, and the rest of the UN system to strengthen our efforts in the area of human rights. And because the issue of enforced disappearances within the context of migration is so politically sensitive, so complex, and still so marginalized, definitely it is extremely relevant to continue articulating IOM's work with other stakeholders, and not only with traditional partners. Building more equitable partnerships with national and local actors, and especially advocating that they play a more central role in developing migration-related policies and programming is one of IOM's top priorities, and I think is very much in line with what the colleague was sharing and what also our previous panelists were let's say, complaining about. These collaboration efforts should consider the cross-thematic nature of enforced disappearances in the framework of migration. That means that enforced disappearances often intersect with irregular migration phenomena. We've mentioned it, human trafficking, smuggling, as well as other human rights violations, which often bring with them abuses, discrimination, and also exploitation, particularly to migrants who are in an irregular administrative situation and those who are in a particularly vulnerable situation. In this sense, it is essential to jointly address gaps, to continue the coordination efforts amongst all actors. This platform, I think, is an excellent example of doing so, in order to avoid duplication and fragmentation of initiatives. Also, to promote information sharing on best practices, it was mentioned between countries of origin, transit, destination, and return, some of those who still face challenges, like Colombia, Morocco, and Mexico, but who have also advanced quite a lot in this area. We believe it is also essential to continue strengthening and innovating in fundraising efforts and in joint advocacy efforts. which should not only include awareness raising and capacity building actions, but also focus on enhancing national frameworks, national and policy legislative frameworks in line with the General Commons recommendations. And to be able to continue strengthening this organizational priority in human rights, IOM aims to continue investing in inclusive, sustainable and solid partnerships with key stakeholders, including national and local authorities, the UN system, of course the committee, national human rights institutions, civil society actors, but also the media, the academia and the private sector, with the objective of capitalizing on each other's expertise and strengths and improving IOM's own internal mechanisms as well. We also hope to continue leveraging IOM's convening role on migration through the UN Network on Migration as the network's coordinator and secretariat, and in the framework of other international and regional forums beyond the Global Compact to continue amplifying migrants' voices, those of their families and communities too, and advocating for their rights.
Thank you. So from staying on the institutional point of view, Colombia will be for the very first time member of the Human Rights Council. How are you expecting to articulate your experience as a main destination countries and the challenges that the world is facing with enforced disappearance in this context?
Thank you, Charlotte.
Well, I believe that our membership in the Human Rights Council starts this year, and it will add to our role as co-sponsor of the Second World Forum on Refugees and the International Compact on Migration, and currently as president of the World Forum on Migration and Development, which we got from France last year, in order to carry out this forum and its preparation this year. All of this is based on a significant expertise and a significant capacity to place the forced disappearances of migrants on the agenda. Because as I've mentioned in my first presentation, forced disappearances has affected us deeply, and at the same time, it has allowed us to accumulate experience. Very, very valuable experience. So Colombia, with all of these tools and as a transition country, doubtlessly is in an excellent strategic position to articulate efforts and effective proposals, and will do everything at hand in that direction. Now we must start by recognizing that the forced disappearance of migrants affect thousands of people globally, especially those who are forced to undertaking irregular routes. Other disappearances happen when there are no social guarantees, the lack of access to basic services, and a sequence of rights violations which make people to be exposed to greater risks, amongst which the smuggling of people by criminal organizations, the abuse of the authorities, physical and psychological abuse. And this is a situation that has taken us to the fact that migration for many people nowadays is an odyssey marked by violence and suffering. In the Council of Human Rights, we cannot ignore all of these violations, and Colombia is ready to unite all of the efforts to discuss the forced disappearance of migrants and other violations of the migrants' human rights. As an international community member, we have the responsibility to demand that the rights of migrant people be respected and that states act in a well-coordinated manner, in an efficient and respectful manner with human dignity. We have open gates as a country to discuss internationally all of this. In a week's time, we will get the special rapporteur on the human rights of migrants in Colombia, Mr. Jihad Mahdi, who, in addition to it all, will visit our borderline with Panama. I know that based on his final report and the report of other rapporteurs who will visit our country this year, we will have a good tool set to suggest them to the members of the Council.
Thank you very much. We are running out of time, so I will suggest that we already take some takeaways from this session to welcome some questions from the audience.
Good morning from my side. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for joining this important panel to discuss this very complex topic. From the panelists in the first panel today, we can hear about pluralism of topics on this issue, namely protection of migrants from enforced disappearances is the meeting point of human rights law, criminal law, social protection, social inclusion, border security, visa policies, etc. So this pluralism of topics necessarily resulting in pluralism of actors and mechanisms involved. And when you have pluralism of actors and mechanisms, necessarily there is also a huge discrepancy between practices applied across the world. But also we need to be honest and to say that this pluralism of actors and mechanisms sometimes confusing migrants and their families, confusing victims, what they should do, who is doing what, who is the right address to apply for answers and to apply for support. So how to resolve this situation, these discrepancies in practices and this pluralism of actors? I believe that the key is to recognize three words: policies, practices, and victims. And I'm also aware that you will say that I should invert the order of these words and to put victims as on the first place. But truth to be told, everything starts and everything finishes with victims. When you decide to develop policies, you need to have victim-oriented policies. And we heard yesterday and we heard today about importance of political will. But political will is not always enough. Sometimes you need to change the perception of migrants and to change some very old patterns and to change fiber of the society. In those cases, political will is not enough. You need comprehensive policies. And I believe that development and adoption of the first general comment is actually the first milestone in this process. Through the general comment, the committee provided the general framework for those policies. And if we need to define targets, goals in a short-term, mid-term, and a long-term period, I believe that the most important goal in this short-term period will be to disseminate content of the general comment and to try to identify specificities of various regions in terms of the policies. As a midterm goal, we need to work all together on aligning regional and national policies with this general framework. And as a long-term goal, we need to work on the alignment and improvement of the practices based on those previously aligned policies. You said 3 minutes, I believe it was 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So if I may add to that, I take away also safe routes and policies, migration policies that respects human rights everywhere, as well as concrete tools for families and CSOs to search for the disappeared, and transnational cooperation. Like there is a real work to be done that is not being done right now for cooperation between governments. Thank you. We would like to welcome some questions, and if we could like eat a little bit on the coffee break, that would be great. So we have maybe 20 minutes. And yeah, please go ahead.
Hello. I'm from Balochistan. Unfortunately, the tragic number of enforced disappearances in Balochistan exceeds 40,000. And to escape from this practice, many people from my land flee, just like me. But there is another issue. Most of our people flee to Middle East, which is closer to our region. Recently, there were multiple cases where the countries that in Middle East are involved in forcibly disappearing our people and handing them over to Pakistan. 2 cases were recorded in UAE, United Arab Emirates, where 2 of Baloch activists were forcibly disappeared by the authorities of UAE and then handed over illegally to Pakistan. And since then, One of them is Rashid Hussain, who is till date forcibly disappeared, even though Pakistani media announced that he is in their captivity, but till date, his family has no information about him. So my question is, how can we stop other states involving involving enforced disappearances and handing over our people to our oppressors? Thank you.
On prend plusieurs questions? Ou
No.
une par une?
Okay, one more.
Gracias. Quisiera preguntarle a los panelistas.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the panel members, what are the possibilities to raise the category of disappearance as a case of crime against humanity? Because crimes against humanity are characterized by being systematic and generalized, and they have a relationship with the responsibility of states. In the case of migration, what is the possibility that this becomes as a crime against humanity and to include it as a crime against humanity? Thank you. Another one.
Nijara, right.
Thank you very much. My name is Nijara Ahmetašević. I'm a researcher, human rights defender and journalist from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia is one of the main routes, migration routes in between European Union countries. Since 2018, at least more than 300 people died on the route through the Balkans. So it's a Balkan route, many of them in Bosnia and many of them in rivers, which are in between countries, in between Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia. Bodies of these people are left without care. Nobody is doing anything but local people, and Goran mentioned one of them. And most of us, what we are doing that as a volunteers. One of the main obstacles for everything that we do together with families and migrants is the state, and second one is the IOM. IOM in Bosnia and Herzegovina has a very specific role, and in some way, which is difficult to explain here, they took under protectorate. Bosnia and Herzegovina is protectorate, the only one in Europe. So IOM took under protectorate everything that has anything to do with migration management in Bosnia and Herzegovina. My question is in relation to recommendation, one of the recommendations that you just mentioned, which is to have migration process that respects human rights, to develop migration process, but also something close to what you said. Like one day as a researcher, when I research on the role of perpetrators of potential crimes against humanity when it comes to migration, I will definitely look at the role of the IOM and what IOM have done. My question is, how do you reconcile the role of the organization that takes place in building a fortress, Europe or other countries, and having a role in migration management and militarization of borders, and your role as one of the UN organizations which are obliged to follow basic human rights rules and basic human rights of people. So at the same time, to put it in very simple, IOM is participating in murder of migrants who are trying to find a safe routes, while helping the states and their donors, because you are led by the donors, to militarize the world, to make it unsafe place for all of us. And at the same time, you are talking about human rights. What are the human rights for IOM?
I will let IOM reply, and we'll take a couple of other questions afterwards, please, and then maybe click active.
All the questions, or only the one that is directly? Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for the questions and the comments and the criticism. Honestly, that's why we're here, to further discuss, to strengthen our work, and to talk how to do things better. So I obviously, although I have been I was in Sarajevo last September, and I was lucky to see the role and the job that our office is doing in the country. I was there for working on safe and regular pathways with governmental entities and the national human rights institutions. It is, of course, not my expertise, the work and the legislative and policy framework that we have in the country. So thank you for all the background information. And I am sure that my colleagues and our chief of mission and my colleagues in the region will be more than happy to be in touch with you and the research that you're doing. That will be definitely very informative and important for their job. So I'm happy to do the liaison as soon as we get the coffee break. Now, obviously, we all have each own views and understandings of what IOM is, what IOM does. I have myself, I'm a human rights lawyer. I've been working in other contexts, not with IOM, but with ICTJ, with the ICJ, in Colombia and in Latin America, including Mexico as well. And I've been working with IOM for the past 10 years. Now, this is, of course, not about me, but this is to say that from an HQ perspective and from a new strategic plan and a UN agreement perspective, IOM, it is not only morally, but in line with our constitution and mandates. If you read about and encouraged to read these new documents also online in our new institutional approach to protection, we are, of course, forced to respect, to protect, not fulfill only, because fulfillment would be a complementary obligation as an international organization, as UNHCR, OHCHR, as any other international organization. We are complementary to member states, and of course we are an international governmental institution. But we do have not only now the mandate, but the obligation to respond to human rights violations. One example, and of course nothing is perfect and nothing will be able to respond to the gravity and the complexity of all migration matters and human rights violations around the globe, targeting migrants and migrant communities. We see them every day. We work with them every day in the field. I was in Morocco before, and I was a protection officer there, working hand in hand with with civil society and social actors and communities, offering shelter to VOTs, unaccompanied and separated children, etc. But beyond that, I think that it's very important that from our side, we continue strengthening our internal human rights mechanisms. One example that I can share with you is that IOM has just launched an internal wide, if I may, an internal but also wide and global process of determining, identifying, and further working on serious, on grave human rights violations committed against migrants. Now, this is a new institutional approach, and we hope that it will help not only showcase the work that we do, because we don't do the work alone. We wouldn't be doing this work without civil society actors, without you all who are around this room, also national stakeholders, of course, and our donors and partners. But this is an example of one of the things that we do to hopefully also improve and enhance and strengthen our own human rights accountability.
Thank you.
Now, if I may just respond to the other two questions. Thank you. Just
sorry, I will just give the floor for someone else, but we can continue discuss at the break. On the question of how to work with states who are responsible for enforced disappearance and also responsibility and fight against impunity, maybe Mrs. LOCHBIHLER could give us some insight.
Well, I was thinking answering the question from Balochistan. So I assume Balochistan part of Pakistan. Okay, I just want to, on what country we're speaking. So you see, in our committee, we can only deal with countries who ratified the convention. Now, the example you gave is that people from your community are in the Middle East. So we have very few ratifications, but there are Oman ratified, Iraq ratified, and in such cases, of course, if you have, if you report these cases, let's say through the Foreign Ministry of Pakistan has to address the Foreign Ministry of Oman and search for migrants who have a contract, let's say on a construction site. And when we in the committee have a dialogue with Oman, we can ask for this. If you have very specific information that a person disappeared and you draw to our committee, we have the urgent action mechanism, and we can then check your information and write a letter to, let's say, Oman and say, please see where this person is. In a broader concept, I have to say, not relating to the Middle East, of course, there is also what we raised earlier, a lot of racism, stigmatization, and hatred against migrants from different communities. And so I was surprised to hear that, for example, now in Portugal, the extreme right party makes a campaign specifically on migrants from the Indian subcontinent, like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. So in this context, we can also address this. But a key for us is that the country has ratified. So for your case, I think also lining up with the working group on enforced disappearance, then can work with all, is also an advice I can give.
Thank you very much. Maybe you can take a couple of other questions. I don't know where the mic is gone, but you can use...
شكرا. سأقدم مداخلتي باللغة العربية. أنا اسمي ياسين، أشتغل على موضوع الهجرة كمدافع على حقوق الإنسان في المغرب. والمغرب كما تعلمون هو بلد عبور.
Muchísimas gracias.
There is no translator in Arabic. Okay.
It's okay. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me in English? I am an activist of human rights in Morocco, and they have worked on migration issues in the southern Mediterranean region. I believe that the origin or the source of the problem of forced disappearances, can be seen already in 1995, and it was related with the enforcement of the Schengen Agreement. Before 1995, the cases of death in the Mediterranean were very low. Before 1995, the European Union closed its borders with its ex-colonies and opened internal borders within the EU. And I believe that to reinforce the difficulties in terms of the obtention of visas also caused this situation. Countries from the south should also understand that they have part of the responsibility, because there isn't a serious dialogue about all of these issues. Amongst the most important remarks I can make is that there is a total lack of research about these data. For example, DNA data, and we have cases of countries that are both from the South Saharan countries in which you cannot identify the victims. Another problem is not to allow associations and NGOs to work, for example, in the sea, because they're not allowed to work out at sea for the search of victims. And the closure of border passes forces migrants to choose much more dangerous routes like Turkey. Thank you for listening to me.
Shukran, Jazilan. Gordana, does it echo to you and your work on another side of the European Union? Do you want to react on that?
This issue, you want to respond, or I can say something?
Yeah, please go ahead. And we...
regarding this question that you mentioned, although as Charlotte says, we are working on the opposite side of Europe, the issue is the same, and collecting of these body samples and keeping them and something like that, that is something that I believe needs to be regulated by the law, although it isn't. And although we as the organization, we are trying to do something more about it, what I already mentioned, until there is no political will for the institutions to decide to change something, I believe it will be still difficult to do something within that question. So up to us that we do what is from our field of work, but we are not the only one within all of this process.
Thank you very much. I think we have to close up. I'm sorry.